One of the key challenges facing the Indian economy is a slump in consumer demand. Now, this has been a long-standing problem made worse by the successive waves of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the latest from the RBI's monthly bulletin shows that the latest wave, that is the third wave, has also had a similar chilling impact on the way Indian households want to consume and how confident they feel about their future incomes. In fact, this is why discretionary spending seems to have gone down, and most of the money of households is being put towards essential goods and services, which have been hit in part by inflation. Now, this is a conundrum that the finance minister faces when she presents her budget on the 1st of February. We're speaking today on what really can be done to spike up consumption and to improve the mood of Indian consumers. This is a demand being made by corporate India as well, mind you, because they are seeing a hold on capex plans. They're saying that we will put in more money, expand more, invest more once we know that the consumers are coming back. Now, to get a sense of the magnitude of this issue and what the possible solutions are, do they lie really within the realm of the budget? I'm joined today by Rama B. Japurkar, who's a management consultant and consumption expert, D.K. Joshi, Director and Chief Economist at CRISIL, and Rajat Wahi, partner at Deloitte India. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us today. Ms. B. Japurkar, let me begin by getting your overview. Would it be fair to say that consumer demand has been hit badly by the successive waves of COVID-19 and led to a very uneven kind of consumption pattern where you see the demand for high-end products staying steady or even rising, while the demand for lower cost and lower value products has dipped?
Tamanna, thank you for having me on the show. We have just put out data from our research center, People Research for India's Consumer Economy. It's the ICE 360 survey. Because eventually, as I never tire of saying, consumption happens as a result of income. Consumption dips happen when incomes dip. The Indian consumer is never wanting to not consume. It's only a question of whether she or he can afford to or not. Our data is showing that never before since liberalization, if you compare 2016 and 21, have lower incomes declined so completely. So if you slice the country into cakes of 20% slabs in terms of how rich or poor households are, we're finding that the lowest 40% of households have really been hurting. Their incomes have declined by half, by 1/3. On the other hand, if you take the richest 20% of households that we love to call the middle class, which is actually the upper class, their incomes have actually gone up more than they have ever gone up since liberalization. They've gone up a whopping 26%. So there's about 100 million households that has actually earned a lot more money. There are 100 million households that are really hurting. And there's 100 million in the middle that are exactly where they were in 2016. And as a result of which, obviously, are not feeling very good. So it is correct to say that consumer sentiment is an all-time low. On the other hand, it is not correct to say, therefore, that all companies are hurting across the board. I think most companies that serve upper income, India, urban and rural are doing very well indeed, thank you. So I think you're right when you say that there is demand from higher income consumers, evaporating demand from lower income consumers, where the demand has evaporated along with their incomes. That is correct.
So, for example, to illustrate that point further, are we seeing trends such as, and I take this question to Mr. Joshi, where you have luxury apartments selling, but your smaller flats perhaps not at that pace, where you have high-end vehicles selling pretty quickly, but two-wheelers have seen a relative slump? Would it be fair to say that this is indicative of the basic consumer problem we have? And from an economic standpoint, if high-ticket, high-value items are finding buyers, why is it still such a big concern?
Well, I think it's true. I think that the consumption patterns do mirror the income patterns that have emerged. I mean, as Rama was pointing out, there is a gap that has emerged, and I think that's getting reflected in the consumption pattern. And we do find that that consumer items of the rich have huge demand, but they are not such a large part of the consumption basket. I think the rich save more. I mean, the consumption, mass consumption, comes from the lower deciles, the middle deciles, etc. And I think there has been a hit to the income, and that's getting reflected in, if you look at the motorcycle demand, I think it's still very weak. But if you look, as you were pointing out, the demand for luxury goods is quite strong. I think that is why when we look at the demand side of the GDP that came out in the first estimates, we find that consumption is still trailing the pre-pandemic levels. I mean, it's the only big component of demand that is trailing the pre-pandemic levels. And I think that, and it's a concern. I think the consumer sentiment, as per the central bank surveys, also remains, it has started picking up after the second wave, but it still remains below its pre-pandemic level. So I think consumption is an issue. And I think that's largely because I think the incomes have got skewed. I mean, that's keeping the overall consumption weak.
Presenting partner, Punjab National Bank.
आप सबको मालूम है कि माननीय वित्त मंत्री जी 1 फरवरी को भारत का यूनियन बजट पार्लियामेंट में प्रस्तुत करेंगी। आइए ईटी नाउ स्वदेश पे मुझसे सुनिए कि इस बजट को सरल तौर पे कैसे समझ सकते हैं। बजट से जुड़े हुए जो मुख्य विषय हैं, महंगाई, रोजगार, देश में जीडीपी ग्रोथ रेट, शेयर बाजार में वृद्धि, इन सब विषयों पे सरल तौर पे हम लोग चर्चा करेंगे और आपको बताएंगे कि इनको किस तरीके से समझना है। मुझे विश्वास है कि आप जरूर जुड़ेंगे। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Knowledge partner Deloitte. Co-powered by ET Money. Invest in freedom to choose. Download the app. Co-powered by the all-new Thar. Explore the impossible. Co-powered by LIC. हर पल आपके साथ. Banking partner Bandhan Bank.
Amongst all the smiles and laughter, my eyes search for that special one. A small moment in my life that I have preserved in my memory, but you forgot. But this is too beautiful, right? Not more than our friendship though. For the people who cherish a relationship above everything else. Joy Alucas, world's favorite jeweler.
मेरे पास तो कई लाइफ्स हैं। मुझे लाइफ इंश्योरेंस की क्या जरूरत, लेकिन आपके पास तो एक ही लाइफ है। अपनी फैमिली को सिक्योर कीजिए LIC के साथ। LIC, जिंदगी के साथ भी, जिंदगी के बाद भी।
LIC के प्रस्तावित पब्लिक इश्यू में पॉलिसी धारकों के लिए शेयर आरक्षण का प्रस्ताव रखा जा सकता है। इसमें भाग लेने के लिए पॉलिसी धारकों को करने होंगे 2 काम। पहले, अपनी LIC पॉलिसियों में अपने पैन की डिटेल्स LIC की वेबसाइट पर अपडेट करें। आगे आपके पास रजिस्टर्ड डिपॉजिटरी पार्टिसिपेंट के साथ एक डीमैट खाता होना चाहिए, क्योंकि डीमैट नहीं तो शेयर में निवेश नहीं। पैन करो अपडेट, खोलो डीमैट, ना हो लेट। मैं जरा आप भी।
Welcome to Amazon Prime Video channels. Love all the amazing shows and movies that are part of your Prime membership, but want more?
No trouble at all.
More gunfights. More spooky nights. More gourmet delights. More brave nights. More fascinating sights. Get more of your favorites. Watch with add-on subscriptions. Add the channel of your choice to your existing Prime membership. Only with Amazon Prime Video channels.
अब जिंदगी में
वहां।
Wahi, your inputs on how you see this picture emerging. I mean, if we take a leaf out of, say, corporate numbers for major FMCG companies, they have seen a revival in urban demand and in some pockets of their product lines more than make up for what rural demand may have been hit. And the other way of looking at it is that rural demand is showing a slowdown because of a higher base that we saw in the previous year. Would you agree with this?
Absolutely. I think that's to be looked at, because if you take back to 2019, rural demand was very slow because of all the challenges we had in the economy. That was the first time where rural demand did not grow 1.5 times urban demand, which is normally the trend for the last many years. And 2020, post-COVID, when a lot of the rural migration happened, plus a lot of the initiatives and the various schemes and the incentives that the government had given, plus a lot of the labor moving there, and we saw a massive spike in rural demand, which was much more than urban demand, because urban is where you had the shutdowns, but a lot of the consumption moved to rural. I think in 2020, 21, you have a higher base of rural. So on the back of that, the rural growth is much less. You have a lower base on urban. So urban growth seems to be faster. But overall, if I just talk to a lot of my clients, if I just look at the conversations I'm having with retailers, with FMCG clients, with malls, footfalls in November, December 2020 were almost at pre-pandemic levels. The conversions were even higher. I mean, in fact, average bill values were even higher in malls, even though the footfalls were still a bit below. And if I'm just talking about tier 1, tier 2 cities here. And also, if you look at the overall consumption most of the companies had reached pre-COVID volumes and value sales. The big change we saw in 2020 was that a lot of the companies simplified their product range. A lot of the more complex products were dropped because supply chains were very disrupted. They brought all those categories back, and you again started to see a big revival. In fact, last quarter of 2020 was, in fact, some of the best numbers that we had seen from FMCG and accessory and apparel brands. So I think the consumption was back. Of course, this is, January again has been a big hit, because it's also a time where the companies are putting out their end of season products, new ranges are being launched. It's a big time for the retail to, have a lot of promotions and offers out there. Malls, etc., have been shut, or there's been a lot of displacement there. And as a result, it has had an impact, but hopefully this is a short-term one. So my sense is that it's an overall strong story on consumption, both in rural and urban, but the base impact, we are seeing that also being reflected in the numbers that are coming up.
From the perspective of the budget, how crucial is it for the finance minister to now provide support to actually boost consumption, and how can she do it?
If the objective of boosting consumption is to help big businesses, I think big businesses are doing very well based on their numbers. I think they will continue to do well. I think Rajat is absolutely right that yes, certain airlines, etc., have taken a big hit specifically. But I think, as we've seen, a lot of companies that are catering to the rich or the upper class, which, by the way, is 50% in rural and 50% in urban. So when you talk about rural demand, I think we need to be a little more nuanced. I think they're doing okay. I think where the problem is that the small companies, the SMEs that are really getting wiped out, the very small companies that are serving the very small customers, because we are the land of Lilliput, I think both of them are really hurting quite badly. So even when you say FMCG, I think we have to make the distinction between small local FM and the large FMCG players. So I think in some senses, this is a fairly nuanced thing. So we should really focus on the lower half, both the small supplier and the small customer, in terms of perhaps reliefs as far as SMEs are concerned, so that the capacity doesn't just go away and die, whatever is still alive. And as far as the lower income is concerned, I think in terms of benefits, which may not be direct benefit transfers in cash, but benefits that can, for example, benefit schools so that people can help keep their children in school because they have no money to pay. So, I mean, if you take a people view of the economy, I think that's what they're really looking for. That's where it's really pinching. I think reduce tariffs. If kids are going to be in school and being online and they've lost so much time and money, then why not make it cheaper and easier for them to buy simpler phones that they can go and do their stuff on? So from a people perspective, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at 30% that definitely need support of various kinds, and the small companies that serve them that need support of various kinds. If they're maybe GST relief, if they're tax-paying companies, then maybe some some kind of relief based on how many employees you have on your rolls. I don't know. Sadly, I'm not an economist, but from the people perspective, it seems to me that consumption stimulation is not the problem, it's income generation. So infrastructure, I completely support, because if you have a wider network and if you have a lot of infrastructure development happening, then the tractor that is used for haulage does better, the guy who drives the tractor that hauls it does better, and so on and so forth. So from a people standpoint, that's what I would feel.
So let's get more specific in that case on what needs to be addressed. So Mr. Joshi, if I were to look at 2 or 3 constituents, one, if it was sectors which have been hit quite badly because of COVID, your service sectors hire a lot of people, those people have lost income, employment, etc. What can be done for them? Specifically, do you think that there's scope to do something in terms of personal tax and giving some relief there?
Well, I think let's look at the cause of the problem first. I think it will immediately take you towards the solutions also. I think there is little doubt that the rural demand is weak. I think there is a base effect, but what is also true is that the rural wages have been growing at a much weaker pace. I think what is also true is that the Manrega demand has increased, which means there are fewer job opportunities. So that I think is an issue number one. And as you rightly said, I think the contact-based services, particularly in urban India, I think they're still about 8 to 9% below the pre-pandemic levels. And I think 2/3 of these services are in urban areas. So I think just like the rural poor are hit, I think urban poor have also been hit. And what's also important to note here is that inflation does eat into the purchasing power of the poor. I mean, if they have to spend more on energy bills, on medical costs, etc., I think it's going to get reflected in their consumption pattern. So the solution becomes, I think, from a budget perspective, the task is to balance the medium-term objective of pushing the incomes up, making the economy grow at a faster pace. I think that has to be balanced with the need to support the vulnerable sections. And I think this can be done by creating some fiscal space. I think the budget can slow down the fiscal consolidation process. I think it needs to bring the deficit down over a period of time, but need not do it in a hurry. I think that will give them some money to spend on these segments. So I think one is, of course, I think Manrega is a short-term buffer for rural areas. I think you'll have to depend on that. Then second is, I think, where from an inflation perspective, I think, which could become a more sticky problem, I think there is need to reduce the tariffs. I think crude oil prices were reduced. I think tariffs were reduced. Maybe they can be brought down further. Import tariffs have been raised. I think there is some scope for bringing them down. I think that will attack the consumption issue for the poor from the point of view of how expensive things are. And I think then, obviously, I think the government has to be focused on pushing growth up also. So they need to focus on infrastructure, which has multiplier effects on the rest of the economy. I mean, and that's going to help the private corporate investments as well.
ये तैयारी है डब्बे में दावत बांधने की, चमकती शर्ट पहनकर ऑफिस जाने की, मोहल्ले के छक्के छुड़ाने की और सजकर दोस्तों से मिलने की। हम हैं भारत और अब हम तैयार हैं खुशी के छोटे बड़े पलों में जिंदगी खुलकर जीने के लिए। भारत को हर रोज तैयार करता है स्नैपडील।
What would the next wave of fintech innovation look like? What are some need gaps that Fintech 1.0 has glossed over but not addressed? Let's take a closer look at the foundational shift that Fintech 2.0 shall usher in. Presenting the Economic Times BFSI Innovation Tribe 2021. We have attempted to recognize and establish the think tank of key players in the BFSI sector and the steps that they are taking to create a foundation for a more seamless Fintech 2.0 and its distinguishing facets. Catch the episode at these times only on ET Now. Brought to you by ET Edge.
कल 7 वादे करूंगा तुमसे और एक खुद से। हम सफर बनने का वादा तुमसे, अपने सपनों को ना छोड़ने का खुद से। सब आधा बांटने का वादा तुमसे, अपनी ख्वाहिशें पूरी करने का खुद से।
जिन्हें अहमियत है वादों और इरादों की, उनके लिए SBI लाइफ। करो पूरे अपने इरादे, अपनों से किए सभी वादे। SBI लाइफ, अपने लिए, अपनों के लिए।
Mr. Wahi, do you think that there's any space for personal tax relief?
No, my sense is that I think the government has already done a lot in that space, both from a corporate taxation and from a personal taxation. And I don't even know how much leeway they have, in the overall sort of managing the overall fiscal deficit. I think Mr. Joshi made some very good points. One is attack the inflationary points, especially fuel prices, input prices, the raw material prices, as well as food grain prices that are impacting the lower 20-30%. Make sure that those are getting addressed at the top level to drive to stimulate growth. Continue with the large projects that they've embarked on, whether it's road building, infrastructure building, looking at building these large logistic hubs, manufacturing hubs to drive more production, because a lot of that filters back into the economy. And the other part is that the segments of the economy, you just heard airlines declare 20,000 crores of losses, etc. How do you help them, some of these sectors in the hospitality, the travel, etc., because they have lost a lot of people. They also lost a lot of money. A lot of businesses are shut. I heard some statistic about 25-30% of restaurants, for example, may have permanently shut. A lot of that is staff that goes and works in these environments, then goes and spends money on buying FMCG and everyday products. So I think a lot of those households have been impacted. So these sectors of the economy that have been impacted need to be supported. The government needs to figure out what are some of the 2 or 3 mechanisms that they can do to support that. But on the other hand, keep the projects going, and also then address the inflation issue on some of the key products that impact the household spending.
Well, the people focus will definitely be there in this budget. That seems a given. This budget is being presented after the third wave of COVID-19, before 5 crucial state elections. Let's hope it gives some real relief to the bottom 20%. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us on the show today.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.